Our study today, Spiritist Bibliography, is actually going to be a little bit of a review on some of the Spiritist books that we have available within our Spiritist movement. I'm not going to say at our center because this nucleus of study, which is the Conscious Living Spiritist group, participates in this movement that is spreading and growing in the United States, began in France, as we all know. If you're taking the Spirits book course with Carlos, you will know a little bit of the history behind Spiritism. Before I continue, do we have anybody who's attending for the first time here today? Welcome. Okay, good. Please introduce yourselves to us. Angela? Rose, it's really good to meet you, and thank you for being here. So have you read about Spiritism before? This is your first time? Okay. I love Rose's face. She's like, yeah. So really great. And before I go on, I would like to state that there are a lot of books. And of course, with the short time that we have here, we are not able to expose all of these amazing books that we have available, already translated into the English language. And I'm going to embarrass a personal friend who's here with us today, who wrote this book right here. Would the author of the book please stand up? Not to be put in the spot. There she is! Yay! This is a great book, Changing Lives with Spiritism. When we saw Heather walking in, I told Marcella, I said, run and get the book. Because it's a great book. And if you guys wish to purchase and have it signed, I mean, how often do we have to get the author right here to do a dedication for us and even answer some questions on how she came about to bring a book that provides further support on Spiritism as a message of hope and consolation in a world where it's much needed today. We want to begin with a phrase stated by Emmanuel when he talks about Spiritist books and literature as being considered a silent friend, in which he states that reading Spiritist books is equivalent to listening to a faithful friend with common sense. If common sense assists in acquiring discernment, those who learn how to discern between what is right and what is wrong will always know how to act. And I will ask him to excuse me, but also add react to certain situations in life. It's interesting that he brings us this sentence because a lot of time people are not fully aware of the benefit of reading Spiritist books. Now, we can talk about how other books provide a philosophy that assists us in our day-to-day existence, such as I love one of my all-time favorite books outside of the Spiritist literature, although he mentions Mediumistic Meeting, is the book by Viktor Frankl, The Man's Search for Meaning. It's a wonderful book in which he tells us how and what we should be placing meaning into our existence so that we are not left with nothing when that of which is of material context dissipates. And oftentimes we are left without meaning for our existence. So it's a wonderful book, which is why we decided to bring this phrase from Paul when he wrote, "Examine everything carefully and hang on to what is good." Spiritist book is a living source of light. What did he mean by examine everything carefully and hang on to what is good? Basically, it goes in supporting our idea today. Yes, read outside of the Spiritist literature, but be careful with what you're reading and exposing your mind. Because bringing from a Spiritist perspective, we have already learned of the frequency, the vibration in which we find ourselves in constant connection with the invisible world. And on our Wednesday meeting, where's John? Ah, there he is. David, John, and I, Veronica, Ricardo, we were talking about how often we walk into this place right here, the Spiritist Center, sometimes even outside of it, and we are forgetting that there is an invisible world that is in constant connection with ours. There's no defining line. One doesn't end and the other begin here. It's a constant connection of vibrations, of energies and feelings, and how we become attuned with the spirits that are around us. So right now we are at the Spiritist Center, and it's a sacred place, and I loved that John used the word sacred, that of which has meaning and value to us, and we often are unaware of it. And so when we talk about examining carefully and hanging on to what is good, we're going to talk a little bit about the physical aspects of reading a good book and the spiritual one as well. So the Huffington Post brought us some science-backed up facts about what reading a good book can do for us, regardless of it, whether it's a Spiritist book or not. It says, reading is the most effective way to overcome stress, beating old favorites such as listening music, enjoying a cup of tea or coffee. I'm going to add wine, vodka, or anything else. Even talking, or even taking a walk, or talking to a friend. Reading is actually good because they had a research and a test conducted by evaluating the heart rate and muscle tension of 6 participants who were there to read, as opposed to doing other activities. So we see that it has a physical effect, a positive physical effect. It says that a lifetime of reading might just help keep our brain in shape. Much like walking helps our circulatory system, they say that it actually helps our brain. And so it may even stave off Alzheimer's disease. So if we don't have it yet, a habit of reading, here's another science-backed up fact on why reading is actually good for our health. Self-help books can ease depression. They don't talk about healing or curing. They talk about easing depression, the feeling of being depressed. And lastly, which I find even more amazing, research has designed 2 experiments that show that people who were emotionally transported by reading a good book experience boosts in empathy. Experience boosts in empathy. In our society, we see a lack of kids who are getting engaged into the healthy habit of reading, where their minds, now I'm going to add adults, are being constantly bombarded by the internet, by social media, video games. And parents are simply not engaging their children into the healthy habit of reading a book. I remember when I was a little girl, and I've said this here before, I used to get in trouble, believe it or not, sometimes, And I used to be grounded, and I had in my own room, Elcio, stop it. We had pillows on the floor and a carpet. And when I was to be grounded, I was told to go to my book, to go to my room, sit down and read a book. And I used to pretend that I hated it. And in reality, I loved it. So I could care less if I was getting in trouble or not, because I was going to get a reward. Now, I grew up with this example from my own father and schooling at that time, that reading was a good thing for us. And engaging a child in reading a book, whatever the story might be, might actually develop a habit for their advanced adult age that today science proves to be effective, healthy-wise. Now, spiritually speaking, I wonder why is it that reading a good book promotes empathy towards others. And a lot of times when we are exposed to the Spiritist literature, this ability to develop empathy broadens. Because I have yet to find a Spiritist book that doesn't talk about the need to maintain silence when we are exposed to the intolerance, to the injustice, to the judgmental acts that we find in society. I have yet to find a Spiritist book that doesn't talk about the need to maintain alive the faith and hope that one must have when faced with trials and tribulations, such as the world that we live in today. And I have yet to find a Spiritist book that doesn't promote the immortal spirit into believing that there is something else after this physical existence that tells us that we are heirs of our future and that we are going to receive in accordance to how we act today. And this includes the way that we deal with each other. I have been reading the case of Nicholas Cruz, the young man who was responsible for the deaths of 17 people. And yesterday read or heard a psychiatrist talking about his history and his past, which included the ignorance, as in ignoring him from society. And we see that as a society, we have a responsibility to each other. That we have people before us with signs screaming in need of help. In need of help. We find that these books come to us to tell us, as Joanna de Angelis states, to keep from driving us over the edge of insanity. And so if I have access to Spiritist books that enlighten and clarifies and assist me in developing compassion towards the person who is beside me, I find that I have a great responsibility to those around me. Developing empathy and compassion is what research states that reading a book can do for us. So enough of that, because I know this has affected all of us today. But where do we find enough material that talks about the need to put in practice virtues of forgiveness, of tolerance, of patience and compassion? Where do we find it? Sometimes in our study group we talk about this. Well, where did you guys get this idea as well? When we come here to do a study, yes, we do have our opinions that we voice, and hopefully they are in accordance with what we learn. Yet, a lot of these ideas are brought on by reading the invaluable material that we find in the words of the immortal spirits, starting with Allan Kardec. And a lot of people have to be very careful with the literature that are told are from high order spirits that come to us to try to advise and guide and enlighten. But 2,000 years ago, we were warned that we should be careful and watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, and inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By the fruit you will recognize them. Talking about the medium's work. By the fruit you will recognize them. So when I get a book like this, or any other Spiritist book that comes to us, by reading the content, we are going to be able to discern, as Emmanuel states, between what we should hold on to or not, as Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. Yeah. I was hoping that Terry was going to say the word with his strong voice so everybody could hear. Go ahead, Terry. Thessalonians. So here's a funny picture because we see the wolf there and he's got the little puppet in his hand trying to fool those that are following. And I remember that I was sitting down at the publisher that we are volunteers in, and I received a new spirits book, a new version of it. Some gentleman in Brazil wrote a spirits book, updated it. And when I saw that, I was a little bit surprised because he sent that new spirits book to many different people. And of course, the face that I made was kind of like this one here. You want to explain why you made that face? You want to? Okay, I won't put you on the spot. Why would this be surprising? Why would I feel surprised at receiving a new spirits book dictated by some man in Brazil? Why? Because I have studied about the character of the revelation of the Spiritist message. And I know that it wasn't from the idea of one man. It was brought on by high-order entities, spirits, compiled by Allan Kardec, who had a specific mission to bring us the third revelation, the message of truth. And so when we start studying, we start analyzing what makes sense and what does not. But in order for us to do so, in order for us to be exposed to books and know what we should retain or ignore, we must first begin with the basis. And here, I would like to honor Allan Kardec, if I may, and you may join me, because as it's told in the preface or the introduction of the book, What is Spiritism? We are here to honor Allan Kardec and celebrate his memory because we find ourselves gathered here today since one and the same sentiment with veneration and recognition that stirs up our hearts with regards to the founder of the Spiritist philosophy. Because when we open the book, What is Spiritism, and we read the biography of Allan Kardec and find out what he endured to be able to bring us what we have today, that is solid information for our existence, we can't help but feel the need to honor his memory and bring Allan Kardec even more to these days in the knowledge of who he is and what he represents to us in Spiritism. Especially when we have so many false prophets coming about bringing information that goes against the Spiritist philosophy, the Spiritist body of knowledge. And so we begin with a foundation. The 5 Spiritist codification book found here, I took the liberty of maintaining them in French, the covers, because that's how it all began. And thankfully we have the translation of these books in many different languages to assist the immortal spirit, all of us here. Because it is going to be through the study of these books, starting with the study of these books, that we are going to be able to discern between what is correct from a Spiritist point of view and what is not. Or if I read the book In the Realms of Mediumship, which our Wednesday students are reading. John, what is your view on the book In the Realms of Mediumship?
Information that we can get no other place.
About information?
Life and the hereafter.
And mediumship as well. The tool of enlightenment that we have. But if I don't read the medium's book, how am I going to understand some of the terminology that André Luiz brings 100 and something years later? How am I going to read about no solar and not feel that maybe that's science fiction? Well, if I read the Spirit's book and I learn about the spirit world and the world of the spirit that we find contained in the Spiritist book, it's not going to make any sense to me. So I need to have basis for understanding. The gospel according to Spiritism comes to us to console, to explain some of the passages that we still have had a hard time understanding. What is, and now I'm going to pick on John again, in our study group of heaven and hell, what is one word that gets to you, John, that we have to study in the light of Spiritism? One word, don't think of many.
Trust.
Shouldn't say that. Punishment, sins. Words that were utilized at that time and that obviously connects us to the feeling of harsh religions that today is explained in light of Spiritism. What are punishments? Truly, are there punishments from the Spiritist perspective? John?
Just
Corrections, consequences, revisit of the past, and we can talk about it and we find the divine justice, God's justice, when we start reading and understanding a little bit about the terminology that was used at the time of Kardec. And Spiritism opens this ability for us to broaden our mind in knowledge, which is another scientific research that we find. We can't talk about only those 5 books. We have to talk about what is Spiritism, which is a wonderful book that we have available to us as well. The first chapter using dialogue to form answers to the most common objective of those who were unaware of Spiritism's fundamental information, as well as to refute the main arguments of its opponents. So there is a talk between Kardec and a priest, which is very valuable and really interesting to see. I wish I could see that played out as a debate. You know, we could put Elcio in one side playing the priest, and we can put Terry as Kardec answering the questions. That would be fun. We should do a play like that. It's a really wonderful part of the book. We have the second chapter devoted to a succinct exposition of the science, practical and experimental aspects. In a way, the chapter forms a summary of the medium's book, which is really great for us to read as well. And then finally, a summary of the Spirit's book containing the Spiritist doctrine solution to a number of problems of great psychological, moral, and philosophical interest. So if you haven't read this book yet, whether in Portuguese or in English, make sure that you get a copy so that you can also have basis when somebody asks you, where do you get your faith, or what is Spiritism? We can answer, because sometimes we feel it in our hearts, what Spiritism means to us, but we are not able to vocalize it and put it into words what Spiritism is, to be able to feed the mind of those that are questioning where our faith comes from. This little book, Spiritism in its simplest expression, it's very little, doesn't even have 40 pages. It actually came from the idea of Kardec for those that couldn't really afford the book back then. And so he decided to bring this little book forward, which is also a really good little gift to give to someone who wishes to know a little bit about Spiritism, right?
Yeah.
We can give that out. It's not expensive. We can buy it at the center here, put it in a little envelope with a birthday card if we want to. Not to impose the Spiritist philosophy on anybody, but if somebody's interested, here's a little book that we can give out. His works did not stop there. As a matter of fact, in 1858, Allan Kardec launched the Spiritist magazine, or the Spiritist Review, which we have available translated 4 years already through the United States Spiritist Federation. We have 1858, 59, 60, and 61. Valuable information as well contained in these books, although they're a little big, and it's 12 months within each edition, so it's a lot of information. For those that are serious about studying Spiritism or being asked to talk about Spiritism, even in public lectures, there is enough information contained here that will give us support on what we are trying to say. And of course, some of the other years that are still coming to be translated are right here, 62 through 69. So we know that we have a lot of great material coming out for Spiritism in the English language. And we hope that as they do come out, we help and assist the United States Spiritist Federation in advertising and in promoting, because really what we are promoting is the material in itself that will assist anybody who comes in contact with Spiritism. One of the arguments that when we get involved in the Federation work, whether it's the Federation of Florida or the United States or any other nucleus of studies, is how to present Spiritism to the Americans. I would like for you to stand up, please. Yeah, you, my friend, my beloved friend.
Want me to do what?
I wanted to talk about how easy was the Spiritist philosophy for you to understand when it came to you.
How easy it was
Yeah.
to understand?
Did you have a hard time being exposed to Spiritism?
I didn't have a hard time being attracted to it. And do you mean the translations?
No, I just mean your feeling about the Spiritist philosophy, the information that came to you.
It's the most wonderful thing I've ever obtained in my life. I love the philosophy. I think the movement is very important to all of us, and that we should all share it as much as possible. Not only here, but outside. Did I answer?
Yes, thank you. Because I wanted to get exactly to that. There seems to be a preoccupation.
Am I the only American in the room?
No,
Oh, but you already picked on John.
I did. I start picking on different ones. No, it answered, because this constant preoccupation or worry that we have with making sure that Spiritism may actually enter the hearts of Americans or any other culture it doesn't exist. In the book Among Brothers of Other Land, Andreia Lewis comes to us through the mediumship of Chico Xavier, telling us that we need to start abolishing terms such as foreigners, because we're talking about the immortal spirit. So when we have a philosophy that came from France, made a huge impact in Brazil, and now here we are in the United States promoting Spiritism, disseminating this idea, it's not about whether Spiritism is going to make sense for American Cuban. No, it's for the immortal spirit, really. That's what it is. It's the kind of impact that it's going to have in the heart of someone who has just lost a loved one. Not really, because we don't lose them. We know this already. It's a temporary physical separation. And we already have the certainty that we are going to meet those that we love who have parted before us again. We have the certainty from the innumerable proofs that comes through the channel of Divaldo Franco and Chico Xavier and tells us that life goes on, that I'm going to see my father again if I don't already see him when I sleep, and my spirit temporarily goes and visit the places, the realms in which he finds himself in. So when we encounter someone whose heart is bleeding, in need of information, I'm addressing the immortal spirit, whose heart is ready to receive the information that spoke so loudly in our own hearts, whether in Brazil or, as in my case, here in the United States for the first time. Because here's where I learned about Spiritism, when I was 14. In the same case for Marcelo Biga, who's sitting right here. So this is what we're talking about. This year, Genesis, Miracles, and Predictions, according to Spiritism, one of the books that is least read from the Spirit codification, completes 150 years. It's a book, one of the 5 basic books that make up the codification of Spiritism, and it's one of the most scientific work. Right, David?
Right.
You love this book?
Yeah.
Yep. Divided into 3 parts. The first part analyzes the origin of planet Earth and avoids mysterious or magical interpretations about its creation. So God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. So we have the explanation for certain allegories that were used back then. It also describes the questions of miracles, explaining the healings that were promoted by Christ, telling us about fluids and the phenomena that is contained in the gospel. If we study about the fluids, if we study about who knows about that little 3-word thing that annoys us when we talk about, come on, David, the universal cosmic fluid. Ooh, those who have studied the universal cosmic fluid, my goodness, they're going to talk about that again. Yes, we do talk about the universal cosmic fluid. We talk about fluids. We talk about how this ability for me to read Biga's thought has to do with the fact that there is a connectivity. There are fluidic emissions from our thoughts that create images in the spirit world. Carlos talks about this in the Spirit's book study as well, so it's important that we read about it. And then the third part focuses on the prophecies in the gospel, which has everything to do with now. Planetary transition, the new generation, the calamities that takes hundreds and hundreds of lives at once. It's actual, it's happening right now. And so we have this book, and a lot of people may say that the Spiritist philosophy is already outdated, but if we take the time to study, and this is a book for studying, not light reading, it's for studying, and hopefully with a group, we are going to find information contained that is actually very accurate for today's times. It's no longer from 150 years ago. We are going to present those who already know, but those who don't. Well, Chico Xavier here, he has over 400 titles. The Brazilian Spiritist Federation, concerned about the number of titles, decided to categorize his books. And of course, we don't have all 400 books translated yet, right? Heather, hopefully, the 400 titles. And so they decided to categorize his books into many different categories. I've decided to bring the ones that actually contain the books that are translated into English so that it can facilitate for us to have knowledge of what is available. Revelations, such as the book No Solar, revealing before us the spirit realm, and Andreia Lewis' unforgettable stay in the lower zones, the umbral. Don't watch the movie, just read the book, right? We need to read the book. There are information contained in the book that is not contained in the movie. The book is rich in information, and it's worth reading and rereading. As a matter of fact, I'm restarting the series Life in the Spirit World because we forget about these little things that we read and sometimes we don't pay attention. As we broaden our understanding of Spiritism, when we read the same information again, it makes a lot more sense. So the study is continuous. An identifier category, as in the books Parnassus from the Beyond, not translated. This book, which was released in 1932, was the one that made a huge impact in the giving accreditation for Chico Xavier's mediumistic abilities, because it had over 90 different poets from the Brazilian literature discarnated that came to him. It's in Portuguese. That came to him, and he channeled all of these messages. Now, Chico Xavier had a 4th grade education, and there was no way that he could bring forth the kind of writings that he did if it had not been by the immortal spirits coming back and writing through him. And they had to actually get people who were experts in literacy, from poems, from the history from Brazil, to analyze it and say, nope, all of these are accurate, and they do match the character of the poet who has already discarnated. So he brought a lot of credibility for the kind of work that he did. So identifier, as in identifying certain, the works that identified certain spirits that came through him. Enlightening messages such as Our Daily Bread that we have, and we're going to talk a little bit about those. Narrative, such as the series found and contained in Emmanuel's book, and we're going to also present them here. Historical, such as the book On the Way to the Light, which is another one that we highly recommend in either language. And finally, storytelling, such as Jesus in the Home. Anyone here have yet to read Jesus in the Home? Everybody's really great book. As a matter of fact, the very first chapter, as stated by Neo Lucio, was the first gospel at home ever done in the time of Jesus, that actually shows us the need to have this moment within our family, how important it is to do the gospel at home with our family members, even including the kids, discussing about the teachings that are contained in books such as Our Daily Bread or the Gospel According to Spiritism. And if we start about fluids, we're going to find that elevating the frequency, the vibration of our spirit by being in touch with these books is actually going to modify the very atmosphere of our home. In order to understand that, we must read to see how we are able to impact the place that we live in. So is our home a home or a house? What makes a house a home? Right? There's a very big difference. If we cultivate arguments and fighting, disrespect, intolerance, cursing, we already know that we are going to modify the atmosphere of where we live in, where it's a place that is cold and not welcoming, and where there's a lot of resistance between the members that live in that place. On the other hand, when we start practicing the things that we learn in Spiritism and elevate our frequency, it modifies the home we live in. And as Chico Xavier states, and Divaldo Franco and other beings, when we modify the very atmosphere of our home, we have the ability to modify and make an impact in our own neighborhoods. And if the neighborhood collectively did that, they would modify the vibrations of the cities, and so on. We talked about some of the researches that were conducted when a group of people placed themselves into prayer, and how it actually contributed to lowering the crime rate, right? David has brought this before in some of his studies, and we see how impactful praying truly is in our lives. Here's the series Life in the Spirit World. We find that we have almost all of them translated. Actually, we do have all of them translated. I can tell you that 2 of these books are coming out in this year, yet still. Evolution in 2 Worlds and the Mechanics of Mediumship will be coming out soon. So David's like, just give it to me already. You know, David is like dying for Evolution in 2 Worlds. And so am I, really, because these 2 books are completely different from the others that have already been released from the series Life in the Spirit World. Heather reviewed the Mechanics of Mediumship. She knows how different it is, this book, from the entire series. So you guys are going to be very surprised. It actually comes to tell us about how amazing the mediumship from Chico Xavier was, because the terminology and the information contained in these books can never be written by someone who has a 4th grade education. It's a lot of terminology that were brought on not by one spirit, but rather a group of spirits that worked with Andreia Lewis to bring the information contained herein. Why are these books important to us? Because if I want to understand about the mechanic of prayer, I'm going to open the book, The Messengers, Missionaries of the Light. This week we're going to be reviewing in the work of Passes that explains to us also how and what what is the mechanics behind the passes also. If I want to learn about the discarnation process and what my posture is when I have someone that I love nearing the phase of detachment from the physical body, going to the real life, then Workers of the Life Eternal is going to present me 5 different cases of discarnation and what happened to the spirits, telling us that every discarnation process is different. Missionaries will tell us about the reincarnation process, which is also very important for us to read. And we truly hope that you guys will take the time to seek a little bit of the information contained in these books, because it's invaluable for us as Spiritists, living with the understanding that we are immortal, and this is all temporary here for us. Here's a series by Emmanuel that we find a recollection really of his previous existences, and I'm going to say here, everybody's going to have their favorite. My favorite from this collection is 2,000 Years Ago in Renunciation. Marcelo's going to tell you that you should buy Paul and Stephen, and we are all going to have our favorite ones, but what's important is reading these books, traveling 2,000 years ago, and finding enough information as Christians, because Spiritism is a Christian philosophy. We have Christ as our model, as our guide for humanity. And Emmanuel tells us that although for him the memories of telling us about his existences in these books are sweet, they're also very bitter. Profoundly painful because of the hardness of my heart, which was unable to profit from the precious hour that struck the clock of my life as a spirit 2,000 years ago. We find ourselves as Emmanuel in this existence, because we have with Spiritism, symbolically speaking, Christ returning to us, presenting himself in front of us, inviting us to review our existence as he did with Publius Lentulus in 2,000 years ago, and asking if we are going to wait another millennia to go by before making a change under the Christian light. It's a very personal question that we must start answering and addressing. In the current world that we live in, with all the intolerance that's happening, seems to be the word in style today, intolerance. I like to propose a new one, silence, as to review how we are contributing for the impact that we have in our world. Not a silence that is inactive, a silence that we continue working, work, forgive, pray, and wait. That's what Alcione talks about in the book Renunciation, which, by the way, is also one of the most beautiful love stories ever. So please read the book. If you're like a romantic like me, read the book Renunciation. The Living Spring collection is here. We still have one book missing out, actually 2 from this collection right here. Messages that have come and that are explained from the teachings of the New Testament. So Emmanuel does a wonderful job, like it was read in the beginning. Actually, that was Dias da Cruz, but before we were studying about these books here, we have one passage from the New Testament, and Emmanuel brings it to light into modern times to give us assistance in understanding how we can put into practice in seeking peace and harmony when we are faced with struggle and everything else, the difficult and the goods in the so-called evils of life. Our little book, Our Daily Bread, won the medal bronze in 2015 in the Illumination Book Awards as Enlightenment Book, a book that was reviewed by people who had different Christian books before them that were sent by 4 different countries and 28 different states within the United States for review. And Our Daily Bread won the Medal of Bronze, which is really great for us to know as well how little by little Chico Xavier work starts to get recognized as being a book that actually provides faith for the Christian community. A bonus review is the On the Way to the Light, another very important book that we have here, in which Emmanuel talks to us about the world, the origin of our world, the events and facts and situations that have made an impact in our humanity. He analyzes the mission of other spirits as Krishna, Buddha, Abraham, Moses, Confucius, and so on, So Francis of Assisi, and even Allan Kardec, Paul of Tarsus. So this is a really great book to have for reading as well. A lot of historical content and information if we have the interest in that type of literature, or if we know someone who would benefit from this book before presenting them with a book, say, like Nosso Lar. So this is a really great book as well. And we can't talk about the Spiritist book without talking about Divaldo Franco, who is someone that has also psychographed over 200 books. 104 and over have already been translated into different languages. We have, now they're coming out in greater number in English, so we can also have access to his material, with over 12,000 conferences that he has held worldwide, and 71 years of uninterrupted mediumistic and philanthropic work, from finding the Mansion of the Way, which is an organization in Bahia that assists over 6,000 people daily, 3,000 kids, and the remainder assisting adults and the elderly. So the selling of his books obviously go all towards maintaining this organization, which tells us how amazing truly the life of this man has been. And just to have you a little fun fact, both Joana de Angelis and Emmanuel were actually spirits that made up a group of the high order spirits that worked in the codification of Spiritism. I don't know if you guys know this, but they're found in the Gospel according to Spiritism. Joana de Angelis presents herself in the book as a spirit friend. She brings us the message on patience, which is really great and valuable for us to read as well. So it's interesting to see that we still have books that are being brought to us by spirits who are actually part of the codification, that worked under the guidance of the Spirit of Truth, under Christ's guidance through Allan Kardec. From the psychological series, Joana de Angelis brings us 16 books. These books have already been translated and are available. Other books are being reviewed right now that are going to be coming out soon. Jesus in Our Days, Plenitude, Times of Health and Conscientiousness, The Conscious Being, Life Challenges and Solution, and The Psychology of Gratitude. These books address situations that truly assail us psychologically speaking. They talk about insecurities, they talk about the crisis that we face, they talk about depression, panic attack. You know, some of the other books that do not touch this directly, Joana de Angelis comes and does that to try to promote the well-being for the immortal spirit. So she's not addressing only the material aspect of it, she's also addressing the spiritual aspect of it so that we can have well-being physically and spiritually. And another little great book that we have by her is Happy Life. It's a little booklet 4x6 that is also a great gift for us to give out to people. Messages and thoughts from Joana de Angelis that we can have also on our bed, by the side of our bed, when we go to sleep at night or when we wake up in the morning. We can all have a happy life, which is what she's trying to promote for us in our day-to-day activities. Additionally, we have new books through the mediumship of Divaldo coming out. That is The Dawn of a New Era and the Spiritual Disturbances. They're coming out this month. We already have Planetary Transition, and the spirit that comes to bring us information, he focuses on the area of spiritual obsession and the treatment thereof. So Manuel Filomeno de Miranda is another spirit that is worthy of our attention and reading of the books, because not understanding a lot of time about this interaction from the spirit world, often we get in touch with entities that are of low order by the ways of how we feel and how we think, and this connection that establishes the plug-ins, like he likes to call the term. He uses the term plug-in, which is very accurate today. So the books by Manuel are also very important for us to have and read and understand a little bit more about spiritual obsession and the treatments of spiritual obsession. Leon Denis, I wish I could end the talk right now and say enough said and drop the mic, because Leon Denis, some people laughed, some people didn't, is, I have no words for Leon Denis. Heather and Daniel are sitting back there. They have ExploreSpiritism.com, but they also have this love with Leon Denis. And the people that have read Leon Denis can understand why. He is often called a poet or the apostle of Spiritism. And the information, these 3 books here are available. You can buy them in Amazon.com or through the sites, the United States Spiritist Council. After Death, Spiritist Federation. Spiritism in the Arts and Into the Unseen. Spiritism in the Arts, I wish I could talk about all of them, but this is really great for people that want to understand about the beauties of our world and how artists find their inspiration in the spirit realm, whether it's a high elevation or low, depending on the artist and how it vibrates. But he actually interviews 2 artists from the beyond who come back to tell him about the music and the paintings and the poems. So it's a beautiful book to have as well. As a matter of fact, get all 3. We have them here, Biga?
Yes.
Yes, we have them here. Ivone do Amaral Pereira. Now I'm rushing because, again, I wish I could talk about all of them, but I need to talk about this woman because she was a true example, an entire life built on renunciation of oneself, humility, faithfulness, and hope. Her mediumistic perception began at the age of 5. She actually couldn't discern between an incarnate and a discarnate being. She's awesome. I mean, there's one specific situation. She was really poor. And she had met this guy who invited her to go eat on a date. And she was starving, so she decided to go. He was a military. And as she's about to enter the restaurant, her spirit guide presents himself in front of her and says, "Where are you going?" And she says, "I'm going to go eat. I'm starving." And he says, "Well, you can go, but if you go, I leave." And she was surprised. And she asks why. He says, "Well, because as you go in there, what do you think his expectations are going to be?" So telling her to be truthful, even through the times of hardship, financial hardship that she was enduring, to keep her respect as a woman, because he knew what the guy wanted from her at the end of the night. And she makes a choice, a decisive one, and she leaves behind with her spirit guide. At that night, out of nowhere, she received a basket of food and milk. And he appears before her and says, "Believe and trust that divine providence will always, always come to our assistance as we need. We just need to do our part." It's a beautiful story that tells us that we are never going to be abandoned. And she is a great example of this. She wrote a lot of stories. One of the collaboration had to do with Leon Tolstoy, the great Anna Karenina writer, who actually, after discarnating, became a little bit distraught about the impact of some of his novels, how some of them actually had people committing suicide and so on. And so he comes back in spirit to Ivone and proposes that she start writing with him, because Ivone actually also had committed suicide many times in previous existences. So it was a way for the 2 of them to make amends, no punishments, to make amends for past mistakes. And one of the classics, bestsellers, masterpiece considered in Brazil is Memoirs of a Suicide, which took the Brazilian Spiritist Federation over 20 years to release it, because they couldn't believe the content that she had brought in the beginning, describing the valleys of the suicides. And after Chico Xavier and Divaldo Franco talked to Fabi about the fact that those places existed, that they had been there rescuing suffering spirits, they decided to release the book. Now that to me would be enough to open my curiosity and want to read that book and find out what was it so big about it. It's a great book for us to read as well. She also had a great partnership with Leon Denis. Whatever she lacked in as far as intellectual content was concerned, because she also had very low schooling education, Leon Denis made up for in the works that she brought. So it's important that we know also this kind of partnership that Ivone do Amaral Pereira had with him. So what's our hope today? That you go out there and buy all of these books, help the Spiritist Center, put them back on the shelf and then read them? Or is our hope today that we start living our lives, exposing our brains, exposing our spirit, raising our vibration, being aware and mindful of the things that we are reading and what the Spiritist literature can do for us as far as the education of the Spirit is concerned? Truly, that's our intent when we decided to bring a study on the Spiritist Bibliography? Where do I find the information contained on prayer and hope and the healings of Christ and everything else that sometimes we come to the Spiritist Center, we participate in the study group, and that's as far as our study goes. But truly what we are proposing is that we get into the habit of reading the Spiritist books and exposing our mind and our spirit to the content so that we can grow and ascend. Amelia Rodriguez says that when we read books that promote our well-being and our spiritual growth, when we discarnate, we are going to receive in our hands a book containing the story of our lives. And what we hope to encounter in these pages, she says, is one that is going to bring joy in seeing the kind of existence that we had. In saying this, she proposes that the responsibility belongs to each one of us as far as how we live and what kind of tools we bring forth to modify the content of our conduct and our spirit, to facilitate understanding the struggles that we go through. So yes, we have a lot of tools that assist with psychology, psychiatry, other amazing books that we mentioned, such as Viktor Frankl, books by Albert Schweitzer that brought us the need to be mindful of others' needs. But we have before us an immense field of Spiritist literature just waiting to be read and to be understood, and mostly to be put into practice. So we hope that you pick up a good book and that you have a wonderful time at home, reading, enlightening yourself, and perhaps even writing new lines of pages into your own book of life. So thank you all for the attention, and have a wonderful Sunday.